Hello, and welcome to the role of art making in trauma treatment and self care. My name is Stevie French, and I'm an art therapist as well as your presenter today. And before I go any further, I really just want to thank everybody for being here. The odds are, if you're here, you have a fairly stressful job, and I just want you to know I see you and I appreciate all that you do. So, as I said, I am an art therapist. I got my degree from Drexel University, and I have experience in inpatient, outpatient, correctional, community-based settings, and in nonprofit administration, where I worked for a community arts program in Philadelphia. I like to focus on trauma-aware work when I work with adults. A lot of people think that art therapy is just for kids, but I actually prefer working with adults. It can be a really exciting experience to witness the change that people can go through at all ages. I lived in Philadelphia for the past 10 years and moved to Delaware a little over a year ago, right when the lockdown happened. So I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about the mental health system in Delaware now. So we have a few goals for this presentation. I want to help you understand and define the profession of art therapy a little bit better, understand why art making can be useful in a trauma-informed practice. And I'm going to lead you through 4 different art activities that are based on actual art therapy directives that I might use in a session that are based on trauma-aware practice, but can also be kind of segued into just kind of stress relief at home. Um, and I am going to be listing and discussing a few questions that I might actually use in an art therapy session that you can also use to guide your art making at home. So first of all, what is art therapy? So on the left, you will see a short answer, and on the right, you'll see the long answer from the American Art Therapy Association, which is the professional organization for art therapists in the United States. The one on the left is my answer. I like to call it art making plus psychotherapy with a clinically trained art therapist. It's focused on psychological healing and meeting treatment goals. It can take place as a group or individually. And it can take place, as I said, with anybody of all ages, kids, adolescents, adults, seniors, and we can work in a wide variety of settings. You already heard a few of where I used to work. People can also work, art therapists can also work in medical hospitals, schools, pretty much anywhere you might have somebody who needs mental health treatment, also just the greater community. So an art therapist is a psychotherapist who uses art making to help people heal and meet their treatment goals. Their role is to maintain the safety of the person or the group, help the person process their experiences and make meaning from their artwork. They are not there to interpret the artwork or say what a certain image or drawing means. That is up to the person who is making the art to decide. They're more of a facilitator to help the client make meaning from their own artwork. And I want to point out that art therapy is not usually for stress relief or even for fun. While art making certainly can be fun, and that's one of the benefits of art therapy, um, it's still therapy. So it can involve discomfort, risk taking, overcoming challenges, and a lot of change and growth. So why do we use art making to heal? Well, this is a presentation for Trauma Matters Delaware. So let's briefly go over trauma, even though it's very possible some of you might already know about it. So I'll try to keep this part short. Greek word for wound. There are big T traumas and little t traumas that we can kind of divide it into. So big T's would be kind of the big impact ones that impact a lot of people, such as a natural disaster or something more long-term like abuse or a pandemic and widespread political upheaval like we've been experiencing the past year. Little T traumas could include a recent move, microaggressions, interpersonal conflicts, financial and food insecurity. Trauma results in a loss of feeling safe. That's kind of the main thing here. And establishing safety can really be integral in treatment. Now, a lot of people might think that when you experience trauma, you automatically get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. But it is possible to get through a trauma and not have PTSD. However, you might still have some lingering symptoms. It doesn't necessarily mean you qualify for that clinical diagnosis. It's also possible to experience secondary or vicarious trauma, such as if you're a teacher and you're hearing about students dealing with abuse or stressors at home, or if you're a doctor having to deliver difficult news to a patient's family. So even without PTSD, you can still experience feelings of panic, anxiety, fear, anger, avoidance, difficulty with trust and self-blame, feelings of inadequacy, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, flashbacks, nightmares. And it's important to know that none of this means you're weak. It just means that you're in survival mode. It becomes a problem only when you still have these symptoms, even though you're experiencing safety and the trauma is over. So the past 14 months or so have been pretty stressful and traumatic for, I would say, most people. Most people have been touched in some way by the events of the past year or so. So it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has PTSD, but everyone I think could still use a little bit of stress relief in their lives. And it can help increase your coping skills um, by helping with your internal resources to be able to deal with the trauma. So why do we use art therapy for trauma? Well, it provides a unique, safe way to process the trauma. It's nonverbal. We're relying on the artwork and the images and the process, although you can also have discussion about it. So that would be the verbal part. And it integrates both of those. So we're going to look a little bit more about the neurobiological aspect of art therapy and trauma work, the use of metaphor in art therapy, and the reasons that it can promote resilience and why that's important in trauma treatment. So, art therapy and neurobiology. This is an area that's recently gotten a lot of attention and a lot of studies. So I really wanted to include this because it's a pretty exciting area for art therapy. So basically, trauma affects many parts of the brain, but a lot of it's experienced in the right side of the brain, such as your emotion, attention, implied meanings, and visual processing, as well as the amygdala, your primal or animal brain. That's that fight, flight, or freeze area where language shuts down and you rely on instinct. It's also experienced in the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and learning. Also, when trauma is experienced, you experience a surge in stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline. So art making in the art therapy setting is a very unique way to bypass some of the defenses of that kind of frontal lobe, more modern brain thinking, and get at these nonverbal, instinctive, and intuitive areas of the brain that might usually be hard to access. And through the awesomeness of neuroplasticity, we can actually rewire these parts of the brain that have been affected by the trauma. And the person can relearn how to accurately distinguish between real danger and safety now that they are safe. So an example of this would be something called cognitive restructuring, which is used in psychotherapy as well. The art therapist might ask the client to create a visual, kind of moment by moment depiction of the trauma, almost like a comic strip or some sort of book. And that can help them make sense of the feelings and correct irrational thoughts, inaccurate memories associated with the traumatic event. There's also the mind-body connection of art therapy. Art therapy is a physical experience, and it can help moderate or decrease the body's stress hormones and their stress response. And there's actually been studies that have shown that art making can lower your cortisol levels. An example of this in the art therapy setting might be pounding clay to relieve tension, or using slow brush strokes with watercolor to calm hyperarousal. So another important part of art therapy is the use of art as metaphor, and this can be especially important when treating trauma. First of all, it creates safety. Safety helps a person feel a sense of distance from the trauma, right? So you don't have to actually necessarily talk about the trauma directly. You can talk about it through something else. And this can actually be a really great way to help people access the discussion about the trauma initially when they're not quite ready. The use of the metaphor in art making also helps create an atmosphere of curiosity versus fear when people are talking about their traumas. And it invites reframing. If you can think about your trauma in a totally different way, it can open up the possibility to see different solutions and different aspects of how it affects your life as well. So one example of a metaphor that either might come up that a client makes and assigns their own personal meaning to, or that an art therapist might incorporate into an art making session is the symbol of a tree. So for instance, a tree can have personal symbolism, but it can also be intentionally used to explore certain metaphorical themes in the discussion, such as that it has strong roots, it can survive a storm and grow and heal its own wounds, it can thrive after being transplanted. Um, and if an art therapist wants to even further deepen the discussion, they might help someone talk about how its rings could be a metaphor. Maybe they might feel like it's a metaphor for age or for time passing. Knots could represent adversity. The colors of the leaves could represent the ability to adapt. Now, it's not to say that the art therapist is putting this meaning on the tree, but the client will sometimes come up with these ideas on their own. Or it can just be a popular jumping off point that the art therapist could insert into the session and kind of see where the client takes that idea with their artwork. So I saw this come up a lot in my work with refugees. The tree came up. You can actually see an image of it below. It's a quilt that was made. The tree can be very important as you literally talk about a refugee being transplanted from their home country and uprooted and replanted, so to speak, in a new country. It takes what's really a traumatic and stressful event, and instead of making it be one about despair, it can help make it be more one of change and growth and transformation. So fostering resiliency can be very important as well. It's the ability to bounce back. Think about a rubber band, right? So when you're experiencing trauma, you need to be able to bounce back from what happened to you and not be stuck in those feelings and those physiological responses after you're safe. So increasing resiliency can become a very important goal for some clients. So how can art making foster resiliency? Well, it can help identify strengths that can be useful in the future. It can help reestablish trust when you think about the relationship between the art therapist and the client, between the client and the other group members, if it's a group, and between the client and the art making process and their art. This is all about trust, right? And that sense of connectedness to community can give a sense of purpose again, can help someone find their direction again and help them feel more grounded. It can nurture a positive self-view and help you feel good about yourself. It can provide opportunities for mastery of a new skill. And it can, as I said, give an opportunity to reframe the trauma and experience the change as part of life rather than it ruined your life. And it can also be a very important part of self-care. So just another little important thing about art therapy in general, but also to keep in mind as I'm leading you through the next half, which is the art making at home. A lot of times art therapists will talk about the process versus the product. I like to say the process and the product because both are important. So what I mean by that is the process of the art making is very important, not relying on what the end goal is or what it's going to look like. This can help you be more mindful, can help give you more of a mindset of curiosity and open-mindedness and being non-judgmental. And this is in turn going to lead you to make a more authentic piece of art that's going to give you much more opportunity for change and growth. However, the product is important. And by that, I mean not the art, but your relationship to it, the questions that you're asking yourself about it, the non-judgment that you have about it, making sure that you're observing it and really noticing the details and making those connections about what it might mean in your life. It's not always pretty either, I like to say. Oftentimes clients will say, my artwork is ugly or I don't like it. And that's okay. Sometimes those moments of discomfort are where the most change happens. So why art making for stress relief? We just talked about how important it is for trauma treatment, but as we learned, a lot of trauma can involve stress. And of course, everybody experiences stress at some time in their life, even if they don't have a PTSD diagnosis. So it can be helpful to just engage in some regular art making to help yourself stay relaxed and calm and just to make your life feel a little bit better every day. It can calm your body's physiological stress response, as we said. It can be inspiring and uplift your mood. It can help you feel connected. So here's my disclaimer. These activities are not therapy or replacement for therapy. So please do try and find a therapist if you feel triggered or you feel like you need to discuss and explore some of the issues that might come up in greater detail. And I am going to provide links for how to find an art therapist at the end of this presentation, if you would like. So first, when we do art making at home or in a session, I like to encourage people to start with a little opening ritual. And this can help encourage you to get to that curious, open mind kind of state of play instead of that more judgmental, oh, I'm making this for beauty and it has to be perfect. So I recommend you kind of set the scene by blocking off a certain amount of time, scheduling it into your routine, making sure you have no disturbances, cell phone off. I usually wait until my kids are in bed and then just engage in some kind of grounding or mindful activity, whatever speaks to you that's going to keep you grounded. And I will also, at the end of this, provide an exercise that you can use just to warm up and kind of get the creative juices flowing in a way that's not going to be product oriented at all. So the first activity we have is a mandala. So these are the things that some of you might have seen in those adult coloring books that go around, sometimes labeled art therapy. They are not. That's a pet peeve of mine. But anyway, there's a reason that they're so popular right now, and that's because they can be very calming. So a little bit of background, they have their origin in Buddhism and Eastern traditions. They can be seen to represent the universe, perfection, and the self. The circle can represent wholeness, unity, never-ending life, and connection. Some similar artworks are Tibetan tankas, which are used for spirituality practices and meditation, and Navajo sand mandalas, which are used for medicinal purposes and healing. In art therapy, we use the mandala a lot because it's structured, but it can also be very open-ended and tailored to what the goals of the therapy session or the client's goals are that day. They can be a really great way to help people discover their own personal symbolism. So your directive, your activity will be to use beans, beads, or natural objects, or really any kind of found object that you have a lot of that are fairly small and have come in different shapes and colors. And you're going to make your own personal mandala. So I'm going to provide more detailed instructions and lists of supplies at the end of this. You can skip ahead to that if you want later, because I know not everybody is going to want to do every project here. So this is just an overview. And the reason that making mandalas this way can be very helpful in stress relief is because it's structured, it's repetitive. You don't have to worry about manipulating the material. All you have to do is place it. It's repetitive because you might start in the center and work your way out towards the outside, or you can start on the outside edge and work your way in. And so you can kind of get in this flow state and it can become more predictable and thereby feel more safe and stress relieving as you just kind of let yourself space out or focus on what you need to focus on and get into that meditative state. It can also be grounding because you have that tactile sensory experience of whatever the 3D material is that you're using and you're placing. You can feel the texture of it. Maybe it smells like something. Maybe it makes a sound as you kind of sift through your materials that you want to use. And it's fairly low risk. I'm not asking you to draw anything, especially if you're not gluing anything down. It's not even permanent. So it's kind of just a little more lighthearted activity that way. It's got set boundaries, which can feel safe. The boundary of the shape of the circle. You're not starting with a blank page. And most people will probably find they have either a positive or neutral association to the mandala, depending on whether or not you've seen it before. And as I said before, you can inject whatever personal symbolism you want into the mandala. So here are some questions that I might use in a therapy session to help a client go a little bit deeper with their experience. And you can certainly feel free to journal about these or just answer them on your own at home after you complete the activity, such as why did you choose to work with this particular object? Did any personal symbols emerge? Did you work through any challenges while you were making the mandala? Do you find anything surprising about the process or the artwork? What kinds of feelings came up during making it? And how were any feelings represented in your mandala? What do you notice now? Is it permanent, such as is it glued down, or is it impermanent, like the one on the left? What can this be a metaphor for? Are there any other metaphors or connections? So before you go into these questions, I encourage you to really just take a few moments and just sit with your artwork and just study it and just notice what jumps out to you. And that's going to put you in an even better mindset to answer some of these. Next, we have weaving. So you're going to weave yarn on a homemade loom and try to remain present and work through any challenges that might arise in the process. So on the right, you'll see the homemade cardboard loom that I'm going to give instructions for how to make. And on the left, you'll see a finished piece. So this again is structured. It does not ask you to draw. It doesn't have a material that's going to kind of go all over the place like watercolor. So that can be a little more stress relieving for people. It can also be repetitive as you weave over, under, and kind of get that pattern going, and it's methodical. Again, it's tactile and sensory as you're feeling that yarn in your hand. It's low risk again in that not asking you to draw or do anything that is very big and going to take a long time. It's just something you can pick up and work on for 5 minutes when you have the time. However, this one does present some low stakes challenges possibly for people. As you're working with this new medium, you might have to go back and correct some of your mistakes and work through some frustration, but that's also where there are opportunities for growth, right? And people might bring their own associations and metaphors to the weaving. So again, once you've completed it, sit back and observe a little bit, and then go a little bit deeper and ask yourself some questions, such as, did you work through any challenges or frustration? What surprised you? Was it relaxing or was it not relaxing? And how's the weaving a metaphor a reflection of real life? So themes of tension might come up. For instance, if you're weaving the yarn a little bit too tight, you might notice that part of the vertical strings start to cinch together and you have to go back and fix it. It can also have a metaphor of connection as you're weaving all these different kinds of strings and yarns through to make this completed piece. Again, you might have mistakes and corrections. How can these reflect real life and how you handle these issues? Patterns might emerge, or colors that might stand out, and personal symbolism might emerge. All of these are things you can explore. So next we have the idea of the box in art therapy. So a box is used a lot for a metaphor for containment, boundaries, something that's hidden and revealed, protection, safety. Again, it's something that's open-ended enough in concept that it can be tailored depending on what the goal of the session is. And everyone's going to bring their own associations with the box as well. For instance, maybe you just moved, so now boxes represent transition to you and life change. So we're going to explore 2 more art activities, the safe space and the self-care toolkit. So your instructions are to create a box depicting protection on the outside and your safe space on the inside. So the reason that this can be helpful in stress relief is that it's focusing on safety. So that's integral to trauma treatment, as we found out. It can be a helpful concept in terms of being soothing to visualize and make your own 3D safe space. And you'll see in the instructions that I even encourage you to spend time visualizing it before you actually engage in the art making. This can be used as a coping skill in the future. It can make a mental concept more tangible. It can be a visible reminder of your safe space, especially if you're having trouble recalling it. And you can kind of get in that meditative state as you're working on this art piece and really kind of feel in your safe space physically as you're putting all of these elements together inside your box. And it can help identify existing strengths and protective factors that are going to increase resilience and help you get through times of distress in the future. So going a little deeper, you can journal about this experience, or you can just take a look at these questions and think through them. What were some feelings that came up as you were working on the box? What is any symbolism or significance behind the images, outside or inside the box? Notice how the box opens and closes. How secure are its contents? What is the size of the box? What might that be a metaphor for, if anything? What are some ways you've already protected yourself and found a safe space in real life? And this is another example of how you can identify strengths through your artwork. What's a way that you are already helping yourself, right? And on the left, you'll see a completed actual safe space box that was made in a session that I did with a trauma group. She really liked cats. And finally, I bring you to our last activity, the self-care toolkit. Gather supplies that will aid you in self-care and keep them in your self-care toolkit. Decorate the outside of the box with images that will soothe you in times of stress and anxiety. So people might have seen this one before. This is one that I won't spend a ton of time on. It's one that I would usually assign for homework and have the client do at home and just use as an ongoing coping skill. So for example, if you need somewhere to start, try focusing on representing all 5 senses. And I have a list of suggestions here to get you started for what you can put in there, but it's really up to you. What makes you feel like you're experiencing self-care? What helps you feel good? And then you want to store this anywhere easily accessible, and you can use it whenever you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. You could even make multiple for different settings, such as one for work, one for home. And then you could also digitize it. You could have a soothing folder where you have music or images or meditations on your phone to take anywhere. Right, so here are some resources and links as I had referenced before. We learned about art therapy as a profession today and how it can be used for trauma treatment. And we learned 4 different self-soothing art-making activities that anyone can do regardless of their age or background or art skills level. So feel free to check out some of these links. If you're looking for an art therapist, you can check out American Art Therapy Association or the Pennsylvania Art Therapy Association. And definitely feel free to email me. My email is listed at the bottom here. I'm also happy to directly send these links if anybody needs, because I know this is a video, so definitely feel free to email me. And at the end of this, I will be going through the instructions and the supplies in more detail on the activities that were listed above. So thank you. Keep calm and make art. All right, if you're still with me, that means that you want to learn a little bit more in depth about how to do these activities at home. So we talked about art making as ritual, and I mentioned doing a warm-up. So one example of a warm-up art activity could be scribble drawing, or you can draw your breathing. They're kind of similar. So for this, I recommend you have a piece of charcoal or oil pastel. Both are readily available at any art store, and they're not a ton of money as long as you stick to student grade. Charcoal's super cheap, or just find it at the bottom of your fireplace. And then you want to find your largest piece of paper. Basically, any kind of drawing utensil is fine though. So what you're going to do is set a timer, and then you're going to place your drawing utensil in the center of the page and close your eyes. And you're just going to let yourself scribble without thinking about how it looks at all. And when the timer goes off, you're going to open your eyes and either observe it. Maybe you might see some images that stand out to you, or it might give you some insight into your current mental state, or maybe you just want to move on, and that's fine too. If you choose to draw your breathing, kind of a similar activity, you're just going to get more in touch with your breathing and allow your drawing utensil to kind of follow the rhythm of that, however that looks for you. There is no wrong way to do it. For the mandala, these are the supplies needed: yarn, beads, beans, small objects from nature. It's up to you. You'll see on the left, the mandala is made entirely with beans. I have no idea what the one on the right is, maybe seeds or something, but it's up to you as long as it's a bunch of small, similar objects that have different colors or shapes. And then for your actual circle shape, you can either just work straight on a paper plate, or you can get a piece of printer paper and just trace a circle on there. You can use glue if you want to glue the objects down or not. And if you want to sort the objects beforehand by any kind of algorithm, feel free to. If not, just have them all spread out so you can see them, however you choose to work. So for the process, you're going to decide on a starting point, then you're going to work methodically from there, either from the center out or from the outside edge towards the inside. And as you're working, you're going to notice the tactile experience of holding whatever the object is and placing it, and just trying to remain grounded. Allow for spontaneity. If a certain material isn't really speaking to you, feel free to change it. This is for you. It's not for a grade. You might notice that a certain form or symbol starts to emerge, or it might remain abstract. That's totally okay too. And stop when you feel like your mandala is finished. For weaving, you're going to need a piece of cardboard. You can pretty much source that from anywhere, even a cereal box. You can just take the front and back of and glue together so it's thick enough. You're going to need yarn or string. I know not everyone just has those things lying around, so some alternatives can be cutting up old t-shirts or plastic bags into long strips. If you're not sure how to do that, just Google it. There's tons of tutorials on getting nice long strips out of those. And if you can, try and choose pleasing colors and textures that speak to you. And scissors and tape. So the process. You're going to start by cutting the cardboard with the same number of small slits in the top edge and the bottom edge. Try and make an even number of slits. You might want to use a ruler to make sure that they're all evenly spaced. So you'll see an example of that on the left. Then you're going to create the warp by taping the end of a long piece of string to the back and then winding it through one of the top end slits down to the bottom end slit and back up and back down and back up and back down until you end up with a bunch of vertical pieces of string going all the way across your piece of cardboard. And you'll notice there's a piece of like a thin strip of cardboard at the top called a weft. You can choose to include that or not. It's just going to help raise the strings up a little bit. So the vertical strings are called the warp. So to create the weft, the horizontal part, the actual weaving, you're going to start with your yarn at one end of the top, and you're going to weave the yarn in an over-under pattern through the warp until the end of the row. So you can see that in the picture below. To the left, you can see how your warp is supposed to look. So when you get to the end of the row, all you're going to do is just loop it right back around and come back the opposite way. So it'll almost be kind of like a zigzag pattern of going over and under. When the yarn ends or you want to change pieces, leave about an inch on the back and then just start a new one where you left off. You don't even have to tie it off. When you're finished, tie the end of the last piece of the weft, the horizontal part, to the warp, the vertical, and then cut the warp along the top and the bottom to remove it from your loom. And then you're going to make sure that you're tying off the ends in pairs so that it's got a little fringe. So you can see that in the left example. They've tied the ends together, okay? Sometimes you can choose to embellish it with beads as you go or on the ends of the fringe. It's up to you. You can go back and sew other little ornaments onto it. Make it as personalized as you want. Oh, and tuck any loose ends into the back. Then you're all done. And finally, comfort boxes, supplies that you're going to need. Pretty much you can find from anywhere around your house. You're going to use a box. Here are some examples listed. Even just use an Amazon box, whatever you've got lying around. If you have the luxury of boxes to choose from, try and choose one that's a size and shape that appeals to you. And then you're going to collect various kinds of paper. Here are some examples of things that might just be lying around your house. I especially love just collecting scraps of wrapping paper. I kind of just hoard scraps of any kind of interesting paper I come across for future projects like this. And then any miscellaneous art materials you might want to include for decorating your box, such as paint or markers or ribbon or flowers. And then if you already know what you want to put inside your safe space box, gather those items beforehand as well. You're also going to need a hot glue gun and or school glue. I find that school glue is best for gluing flat things like collages and images from magazines. Hot glue is going to be better for gluing anything 3D that you have. And you might also need some scissors. So the process, you're going to close your eyes and visualize your own personal safe space. I also like to recommend that you use a guided meditation for this. You can find them on YouTube if you just do a search, guided meditation safe space. And I did provide a link to a nice short one in the resources in the earlier slide. Then you're going to decorate your box. On the outside, you can focus on the theme of protection. And on the inside, focus on the themes of safety and comfort. So this can be real, fantastical, indoors, outdoors. It can be based on a song or a poem, really anything you want, maybe even a dream. And then, of course, you can include any people or animals that represent protection or represent comfort to you. All right, so that actually concludes the presentation. I hope that you found this useful today. Again, feel free to email me if you have any questions at all, and have a great rest of your day.